Audio lecture for Unit 1A, Prehistory, Paleolithic and Neolithic Eras. Studying the past. Anthropologists study human beings. Archaeologists, however, study the remains of humans, like fossils and artifacts. So there's a difference between an anthropologist and an archaeologist. Now, prehistory refers to the time before around 3000 BCE or BC, which is before written records were kept. Historians have limited knowledge of the prehistoric era because the lack of writing makes it difficult to study them, and many artifacts have been eradicated over time due to, weathering and other sorts of things. The historic era represents a small fraction of the human past, from around 3000 BC to the present day, which is relatively a short amount of time. Historians study primary sources, first-hand accounts, and secondary sources, narrative accounts of the past. So first-hand accounts would be things like letters and diaries that were kept from a time period. Secondary sources are things like your textbook. A word about time. Historians have a few different ways to express dates in history, and you'll come across both of them in readings that we do in this class as well as in these lectures. The designations are shown on this illustration. First of all, you have BC, which is before Christ, and AD, which means Anno Domini, which is Latin for the year of our Lord. But now you also see designations of BC as BCE, before the Common Era. And therefore, AD would be like CE, the Common Era. If you look here, you will see that the dates go higher, the numbers get larger after the year of our Lord begins, after the Common Era begins. Everything that is before the Common Era, or before Christ, goes backwards in succession. So it's important to recognize that even though there's not a year zero, we count backwards for BC, we count forwards for CE. Historians have a few different ways to express dates in history as well. When talking about centuries, if you look here, you will see that the centuries are marked according to the years that they're happening. For example, the first century, CE or AD, are the years between 1 and 100. The second century are the years between 100 and 200. So, when you say first century, you actually mean things before 100. When you say second century, you actually mean dates before the year 200, between 100 and 200. So the century is actually one more number than the years. I'll explain this more in class. The peopling of the earth. Let's start with the Paleolithic era. As you see here, there's some indications of what some archaeologists have determined are the beginnings of different forms of life on the earth. Now, we as Christians believe that God was the one responsible for all life being created on earth. The history of life on earth here, continental drift events, eons, eras, periods, and major events. That is the division of history of life on Earth. Human cultures first emerged in the Paleolithic era, also known as the Old Stone Age. It's Greek for old stone. Paleo meaning old, lithic meaning stone. The first human-like creatures are known as hominids, and they first appeared over 2.5 million years ago. In 2015, archaeologists in Kenya discovered stone tools 3.3 million years old. These are the oldest stone tools ever discovered, and it shows that tool making occurred 700,000 years earlier than we thought. The earliest hominids used stone tools. That's why we call it the Paleolithic era, old stone. The first humans appeared on the savannas, or the grassy plains, of East Africa. You saw explanations of these things in the earlier geography lecture. There's the Great Rift Valley there. The eastern part of the savannas, the grassy plains, are in the darker green area. Savannas offered pleasant climate, plentiful food, and animals capable of being tamed. Early humans were hunters and gatherers, and they devised ways to capture and kill animals to eat, and learned what plants were edible that they could gather, that were naturally occurring plants. Australopithecines were the first hominids, walking upright and making. Lucy is Australopithecus afarensis. She was discovered in 1974 in Ethiopia. Height about 3 feet 6 inches. And carbon dating shows that she lived about 3.2 million years ago. 40% of her skeleton was found. This is the oldest hominid that has been found in with such a complete skeleton. Laetoli footprints in the Oldovi Gorge show proof of bipedalism 3.5 million years ago. Bipedalism means walking on 2 feet or walking upright. Homo erectus is the next phase of early man. Homo erectus made complex tools, used fire, and migrated out of Africa. This was about 1.5 million years ago. Likely the ultimate range of Homo erectus is shown in green on this map. In 2010, scientists completed the DNA sequencing of Neanderthals and discovered that 1% to 4% of human DNA is shared with Neanderthals, most likely the result of interbreeding. Homo sapiens are what we call modern humans. They first appeared about 120,000 years ago, and they competed with other hominids for food and shelter. By about 10,000 BCE, only Homo sapiens remained. They were physically and mentally equivalent to modern humans. They outlived the other kinds of hominids. Modern humans adapted successfully to their environments, and that's why they were able to survive. They had enlarged brains. They were omnivorous, meaning they could eat both plants and animals. Bipedalism freed up the hands. They could just walk upright. And the opposable thumbs they had for use of tools and weapons. The development of language helped humans to develop small communities with cooperation and social organization. Migration and adaptation. Prehistoric hunting-foraging bands, or hunter-gathering bands of humans, migrated from East Africa to Eurasia, Oceania, and the Americas. We talked about migrations as part of our geography unit, you recall. Push factors encouraged people to leave a region. Pull factors attracted people to a new region. Humans originated in tropical, grassy plains of Africa, but they eventually moved to vastly different geographic settings and climates, places like deserts, forests, and even the frozen northern tundra. Intervening obstacles are physical features that halt or slow migration from one place to another. And they would run into some of those along the way as well, like ice. Changing geographic conditions forced early humans to adapt simple tools into specialized implements to suit the environment. Tools included harpoons, spears, javelin tips, scrapers, blades, and handles, sewing needles, and even boats. Humans in different areas of the world progressed independently of each other as well. As you can see, there are different parts of the world that had different levels of human beings living in them. A bunch of humans in the darker red, the lighter pink, some humans, and in the gray, ain't no humans. Adaptation to the environment. Hunter-gatherers who migrated to tropical and subtropical coastlands of Eurasia adapted to new environments easily. This was a more comfortable climate. Humans in northeastern Europe and the northern tundra developed special innovations to adapt to harsh environments, strong shelters, fur clothing, and more efficient hunting techniques. So that area there. Humans also used boats to reach Oceania by 30,000 BC. This was proof of adaptation to new environments, the building of boats. Here is a painting on a cave wall of a Paleolithic boat. By about 10,000 BC or BCE, humans had settled in the Americas, establishing a global presence, the Native American population. Controlling fire was critical for environmental adaptation. It provided light, it provided warmth, it was a deterrent for predators, and it could be used for cooking food. And it also reduced mortality rates. This environmental adaptation would help people survive longer. Social structure is now something we need to discuss, the development of. Early humans in various environments had similar social structures and lives centered on survival, food, tools and weapons, and shelter. Small groups of hunter-gatherer humans, usually about 20 to 30 people, developed authority-based family relationships. Sometimes these are called kin relationships. Men typically took leadership roles, but gender played little role in social status. Men were valued as hunters, and women were equally valued as gatherers of the natural foodstuffs that grew in the wild. Scarcity made accumulation of wealth nearly impossible for these early humans. So social class distinctions did not really develop until later. We've talked about scarcity and surplus in our geography unit. The great 20th century artist Pablo Picasso remarked after seeing the Lecaux caves in France that, quote, "We have learned nothing in 12,000 years." Groups remained mobile, searching for food, following animal migrations and vegetation cycles. They would move in their kin groups and they would follow the herds. Occasionally, groups would meet during migrations and exchange ideas, goods, even sometimes people and experiences. Now remember, this is before they start farming. They're still following the herds and the growth of the natural grains that grew in the wild. Beliefs and art of the Paleolithic man. Paleolithic humans created highly symbolic artwork, paintings on cave walls, carved figures out of stone, jewelry out of stone, even headgear and masks, all with an emphasis on nature. You got it, nature. Art often reflected a belief in spirits or sacred places and even the afterlife, like Stonehenge here. Most all of the Paleolithic men practiced a form of religion. Sometimes it's referred to as polydaemonism, which is the belief in many spirits. But eventually we will see the evolution into what we call polytheism, belief in many gods. Polydaemonism, spirits. Polytheism, gods. Polydaemonism included humans seeing themselves as part of the natural world and dependent on nature for survival. Later religions separated humans from nature. Art often depicted the hunt. The cave of Lecaux in France is an example of this. The hunt was, of course, the most important thing in the Paleolithic era, because that was what provided the most food and all the protein. Carved Venus figures were common in this era. Most of the time they were Venus figures. We call them Venus because they were female figures with exaggerated female body parts, associated, of course, with fertility. Perhaps these were carved to try to coax the spirits to allow for a profitable hunt, or that the women would have healthy children. Much about Paleolithic art remains a mystery, but it indicates sophisticated thought processes and a desire to express themselves artistically. The Neolithic Revolution and early agricultural societies. This will also include the development of civilizations over time. Now we're moving into a different era, the Neolithic era. The Neolithic era, we see the beginnings of agriculture, where man controls the production of their food. Okay, so here is a chart for human history. About 10,000 BCE, we have the beginning of the Neolithic era. By the time we get to 3000 BC, we have the beginning of writing, and we call that with the beginning of history and the end of prehistory. 200,000 BCE, Old Stone Age begins. 10,000 BC, the New Stone Age or Neolithic era begins. First civilizations emerge around 3000 BC with writing. The Neolithic era or New Stone Age, again Greek for new stone, neo, new, lithic, stone, began about 10,000 BC and continued until about 3000 BC, when we have the beginning of civilization. Drastic independent changes occurred in human societies all around the world during this time period, this Neolithic era between 10,000 BC and 3000 BC. This, of course, meant complicated economic and social systems were emerging. Changes occurred at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 BC, as temperatures rose and the Northern Hemisphere experienced increased rainfall. In some parts of the Northern Hemisphere, plant and animal species became so abundant that hunter-gatherer groups decided that they could settle down. They no longer had to move to follow the herds. Settlements like this one here at Catalhoyuk became villages, and for the first time in prehistory, humans in different parts of the world and at different times independently adopted a sedentary lifestyle, meaning that they settled down because they were controlling their own food source through agriculture and through domesticating animals. More to come on that. A sedentary lifestyle was possible as humans developed, as I said, agriculture and began domesticating animals. These two things were the key features of the Neolithic Revolution. And this is why sometimes the Neolithic Revolution is referred to also as the agricultural revolution. Humans cultivated selected plants to the exclusion of others, creating a more reliable but likely less diversified food supply. They would take things that they picked from out in the wild, and they would purposefully plant them to see if they could grow more of them, like wheat. And ultimately, when the wheat grew and grew in abundance, they started growing more and more of those kinds of things rather than being dependent upon the wild grains that they could find that might have had different kinds of grains. On the basis of anthropological evidence for societies still living traditional foraging lifestyles and those living by simple, non-mechanical farming, taken in conjunction with direct archaeological evidence, it seems probable that it was women who made the first observations of plant behavior and worked out, presumably by long trial and error, how to grow and tend crops. This is from Margaret Earthenberg, Women in Prehistory. Women were probably the first farmers, and probably the reason why man left his nomadic ways and started to settle in communities, giving rise eventually to civilization. Agriculture first emerged in fertile river valleys of places like Mesopotamia, Egypt in the Nile River Valley, South Central Asia in the Indus River Valley, northern China in the Huanghe River Valley, Papua New Guinea, Mesoamerica, and the Andes. We'll discuss civilizations, specific civilizations that develop in these areas in Unit 2.